Mrs. Browne.
Brendan O'Carroll's character Agnes Browne made her first appearance on RTE2FM in the early 90s. From there, O'Carroll wrote 4 novels about the character. The first of these novels, The Mammy, was adapted into a film, Agnes Browne, starring Angelica Houston in 1999, which received a decent reception in the UK and Ireland, but not so much in the US. After this, O'Carroll wrote more short stories about Agnes Browne and produced several direct-to-DVD films in which he himself starred as the titular character Mrs. Browne. In 2011, a TV series, Mrs. Browne's Boys, debuted on RTE and the BBC. In the summer of 2014, the series spawned a feature film, Mrs. Browne's Boys the Movie.
And it should be avoided at all cost. In fact, there was a much better Mrs. Browne film released in 1997. So let's talk about that instead.
This Mrs. Browne, also known as Her Majesty Mrs. Browne, stars Dame Judi Dench as Queen Victoria and Billy Connolly as Victoria's Highland servant John Browne. It tells the story of the close bond that seemingly developed between the two after Victoria became increasingly reliant upon him in the years following the death of her husband, Prince Albert. Their relationship drew such controversy that it earned Victoria the nickname Mrs. Browne. Rumours of a secret marriage, and what's more, secret children, have persisted ever since.
Of course, the notion of Queen Victoria marrying her deceased husband's attendant is absurd. So why do these rumours start up in the first place? And why do they persist after all of these years?
Victoria's husband, Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, died of typhoid fever in December 1961. From then on, Victoria entered a period of mourning that would last the rest of her life. She only wore black, she refused to appear in public, and Albert's private rooms were maintained exactly as they would have been had he been alive.
Keep in mind that, at least initially, this was all rather normal. In the 19th century in England, women were expected to maintain a mourning period of 18 months. Where Queen Victoria differed is that hers lasted for 40 years.
This is where a problem forms. Naturally, it's not exactly ideal for the Queen of England to be spending her time in seclusion, not making public appearances, and spending most of her time at Windsor Castle, Osborne House, or in Scotland at Balmoral, the estate that she and Albert had acquired in 1847. Victoria did continue her government duties, but it wasn't until 1863 that she made her first public appearance, to unveil a statue of Albert in Aberdeen.
Her absence in Buckingham Palace led a protester to put a sign up on the palace gates which read,
"These commanding premises to be let or sold in consequence of the late occupant's declining business,"
which in modern London vernacular would probably be more like this:
"To let, 'cause now Queen in it." The Queen's public seclusion was not wholly popular with her people. In the 1860s, there was a rise in liberalism within the British government. For example, the electoral franchise grew to include working-class males in England and Wales, with the Reform Act of 1867. And as the film notes, there was a fear of increasing republicanism in Britain, with the Queen seemingly reluctant to engage in her public duties.
So where does the uncouth and sometimes drunken Scotsman John Browne fit into all of this?
Browne had been working at Balmoral when Victoria and Albert acquired the estate in 1848, and had been Prince Albert's personal attendant or gillie. He remained in attendance at Balmoral after the prince's death in 1861. In 1864, when the Queen's physicians wanted her to return to riding again, as she'd always enjoyed her Highland pony rides, Browne was called south to attend the Queen.
Essentially, Browne, having been loyal and liked by the royals and being a reminder of Albert, might have been able to get Victoria out and riding the royal pony again.
It also seems that Victoria and Albert held Highlanders in high regard. She wrote in her diary, "We were always in the habit of conversing with the Highlanders, with whom one comes in so much contact with in the Highlands. The Prince highly appreciated the good breeding, simplicity, and intelligence which make it so pleasant and even instructive to talk to them."
As the film does point out, Browne was not one for obeying proper etiquette as regards addressing the Queen. He would often refer to her as woman, and apparently smelled terribly. But he was always there for Queen Victoria.
Victoria, as the film shows, began to rely on Browne heavily, and he gained a level of trust not usually afforded to servants. Browne offered Queen Victoria both his service and his friendship in a time when she required it most. Although his straight-talking and place in the Queen's affections were not as much beloved by her family, who took to calling him Mama's lover, while the royal household would call the Queen Mrs. Browne behind her back. Some sources have suggested that Browne was even gruff towards the Prince of Wales, who, when he became Edward VII, had Victoria's letters to Browne destroyed, as he resented the Scotsman's influence on his mother. And it wasn't just the royal household that was spreading rumours. The relationship was mocked in the satirical magazine Punch, as well as in other publications. Perhaps the most serious allegations came from the Swiss journal Gazette de Lausanne, which printed an anonymous letter that suggested that Browne and Victoria had been married for a long time. But what exactly was the extent of the relationship between Queen Victoria and John Browne? According to the film, they were just good friends. And that was probably the extent of it. But the royal gossips, the press, and the private jokes did much to fuel rumours of a secret affair between the two that still persists to this day. While there is a history of monarchs marrying outside their social rank, be they widowed or otherwise, the film steers clear of ever trying to suggest that Queen Victoria would have considered such a thing. While she did write to Browne's brother Hugh saying, "No one loved him more than I did," it should be known that in Victorian England the word love meant serious friendship, not romantic love. While it is true that Victoria sent Browne Valentine's cards and letters, she also sent those to Benjamin Disraeli, and no one ever suggested that Benjamin Disraeli and Queen Victoria had illegitimate children. Until now. Look at that face. Look at him. Noodles of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Disraeli. Your secret's out. You can't become king because you're illegitimate. Speaking of Disraeli, upon his leaving office as Prime Minister for the last time in 1880, Victoria presented him with statuettes of herself, her royal pony, Browne, and her hunting dog. These items were the things that Victoria held most dear. Clearly Browne meant a lot to Victoria, as when she died she was buried with a lock of his hair, wearing his mother's wedding ring and clutching a picture of him in her hand. But the relationship seems to have been nothing more than one of a devoted loyal servant and a lonely widowed woman who found friendship in someone below her station. In a rigidly structured class society such as that of Victorian England, that is no doubt going to raise some eyebrows. Even today, royal attendants would find it shocking for anyone to refer to Queen Elizabeth II as woman rather than ma'am to her face, and she might not really take kindly to that either. John Browne gave Victoria a link to something that she had lost, and that gave her a greater connection to him. A connection that never wavered right up until her death. As the film shows, it is when the Prince of Wales falls ill with typhoid fever, the same illness that killed his father, that Queen Victoria promises to hold a Thanksgiving Mass at St. George's Chapel. The real event was a parade through London, followed by a Mass at St. Paul's Cathedral. The Prince of Wales's illness and subsequent recovery came at a time in the early 1870s when Republican sentiment was growing in England. With the public Mass, it subsided. A few days after the Mass, a 17-year-old boy named Aaron O'Connor waved an unloaded pistol at the Queen's carriage, only to be apprehended by John Browne. Browne remained in loyal service to Queen Victoria right up until his death in 1883, and it is quite likely that that devotion is what helped kill him. Browne continued working despite contracting a chill, and probably would have survived had he taken to his bed. Victoria was persuaded against publishing a biography of Browne after his death. She wrote of Browne in a letter to Viscount Cranbrook not long after his death, saying, "Perhaps never in history was there so strong and true an attachment, so warm and loving a friendship between the sovereign and a servant. Strength of character as well as power of frame, most fearless uprightness, kindness, sense of justice, honesty, independence, and unselfishness, combined with a tender, warm heart, made him one of the most remarkable men. The Queen feels that life for the second time is become most trying, and sad to bear, deprived of all she so needs. The blow has fallen too heavily, not to be very heavily felt." Many point to Victoria's saying "for the second time" as a reference to Prince Albert, and that Victoria here was equating the death of Browne to the death of her beloved husband. Nobody can say whether or not there was any greater feeling between the two, but it does seem that Queen Victoria held John Browne in very high regard. Although it wasn't the last time that Victoria would become highly attached to a servant. After Browne's death, she became close to her Indian servant and later Hindustani teacher, Mohammed Abdul Karim, who she referred to as the Munshi. The Munshi, like Browne, was not entirely popular with the royal household, and after Victoria's death, Edward VII sent him back to India, and burnt all correspondence between the two. Edward VII liked to burn things, and have mistresses, one of whom was Winston Churchill's mother. Mrs. Browne is the story of an unlikely friendship between a reclusive widow, who just happens to be the Queen of England, and a man from outside the world she usually inhabits. It is an endearing story about a unique friendship that doesn't fall too far from the truth.
Other than Disraeli being Prime Minister and Ponsonby being the Queen's private secretary before either of them took up the role, and having the Church of Ireland Act of 1869 passed in 1867. But who am I to nitpick films for inaccuracies?